Hillside Ridge, the tractor that saved a community. When I first saw the little craftsman-style house, tucked near the edge of the cul-de-sac, I felt something I hadn't, in a long time, quiet. Not the absence of noise, but the kind of quiet that settles into your bones. After 15 years as a firefighter and nearly 2 of those juggling grief, single fatherhood, and a relentless schedule, I was ready for something still. Just me and my daughter Ella. She was 11 and carried more weight in her shoulders than any kid should. Her mother, my ex-wife, had passed away the previous spring in a traffic accident on I-40. I still remembered the call. The sterile voice on the other end, the sirens, the way Ella clung to my arm at the funeral, silent, her fingers digging into the fabric of my dress shirt. That was the moment I knew we needed to leave the city. The apartment we shared downtown echoed with memory, too much of it. So I took the early retirement option the department offered and packed up what we had. We came here Hillside Ridge. The place looked like a brochure. White picket fences, American flags gently waving. Lawns so green they looked digitally enhanced. The kind of neighborhood where no one honked, where mailboxes matched, and every house had those charming little solar lights lining the walkway. It was managed by the Hillside Ridge HOA Homeowners Association, which I figured was mostly about landscaping rules and newsletters. I wasn't worried. I wasn't looking to stir up trouble. I just wanted Ella to feel safe again. The first few weeks passed quietly. I got into the habit of taking early walks often, with a travel mug in one hand and my phone in the other, checking weather updates out of habit. I hadn't quite shaken the vigilance from my firefighting days. Ella started middle school, and I built her a new desk out of pine in the garage, just like she asked. She started sleeping through the night again. That was the biggest win. Behind the garage sat my old John Deere tractor, an aging green and yellow beast I'd bought years ago when we still owned land near the outskirts of town. It wasn't just for nostalgia. The lot behind our home in Hillside Ridge backed up to a narrow wooded slope, and I used the tractor to carve a small fire break out of instinct, clearing underbrush, especially with wildfire season creeping up. I also used it to help a few neighbors haul tree limbs and move bulk mulch. Mrs. Randall, 3 houses down, needed help after a storm knocked her bird bath onto the front walk. I lifted it gently with the bucket arm and placed it back for her. She brought us banana bread 2 days later. The tractor was parked neatly next to the garage behind a chain link section I'd reinforced with a screen. It wasn't in the front yard, wasn't blocking traffic, wasn't leaking oil, but apparently it was visible. The first time I saw her, she had that clipped walk of someone who hadn't smiled in weeks. Slacks pressed too sharp. HOA red windbreaker zipped to the neck, clipboard in hand. She was flanked by 2 other board members, one bald, one squinting into the sun, like he forgot his prescription sunglasses. She didn't introduce herself, didn't say welcome, just, "Are you Mr. Riker, the new homeowner at 118 Magnolia Trail?" "Yes, that's right," I said. I stepped forward, wiping grease from my hands with a shop rag. I'd been tuning up the tractor's starter solenoid. Ella was reading under the tree in the front yard. "I'm Officer Karen Delaney," she said, voice brisk. "Head Compliance Officer for Hillside Ridge HOA. I'm here to address a violation." I blinked. "I'm sorry." She pointed with her pen. "That piece of industrial equipment next to your garage. That violates Ordinance 14C Paragraph 3, visible construction or farm equipment in residential zones." I took a slow breath. "It's not construction equipment. It's a utility tractor. I use it to maintain the back fire line. And I've been helping neighbors with yard cleanup. You'll need to remove it or store it in an enclosed structure immediately," she said, flipping her clipboard around so I could sign something. "Or be subject to a fine." I looked at the form. She had already written me up. "Would you like to come around and see the fence?" I asked calmly. "It's screened. It's not an eyesore." She didn't budge. A violation is a violation. I didn't sign. Just nodded and told her I'd take a look at the ordinance myself. Ella stood quietly behind the front window, watching. That night I went through the HOA welcome packet I'd barely skimmed during a move-in. Sure enough, there it was, 14C. But there was a footnote: equipment for property maintenance with written permission may be granted conditional exemption. I hadn't known I needed permission to be helpful, and no one had complained, at least not to my face. But I wasn't about to go to war over a tractor, at least not yet. I sent an email to the HOA board requesting that exemption, explaining my role, past the utility of the machine and the help I'd given neighbors. I even attached photos showing how well it was screened from view. Days passed. Then came a letter, no email, just a printed letter taped to my door. Denied. No explanation. Just an additional fine if the equipment was still present after 2 weeks. Ella sat at the kitchen table doing homework. She saw me crumple the letter and toss it into the bin. "They still mad about your tractor?" I nodded. "Looks that way." She reached over and squeezed my hand. "You're not doing anything wrong, Dad." I forced a smile, but inside something old stirred something from years ago. A feeling I hadn't had since watching bureaucrats cut budgets to our station while we fought structure fires with outdated gear. That quiet rage that builds in the space between knowing you're right and knowing you're being targeted anyway. And I could feel it. This wasn't over. The next morning, I walked out to the side yard and ran my hand across the hood of the tractor. Its paint was dull from years of sun, but it was still sturdy, reliable. It was the kind of machine that didn't care if you were rich or poor, just whether you needed something done. I had rebuilt it twice already, first when I bought it used, and then again after a trailer accident busted the axle. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. And around here, it had become more than just a piece of equipment. It was how I helped build some sense of belonging in a neighborhood that from day one hadn't exactly rolled out the welcome mat. I remembered the first weekend we moved in how I saw the Hendersons down the street trying to haul a dozen bags of gravel for a new patio extension. The husband had a bad back, and the wife was maybe 5 feet tall on a good day. I offered to help, and with the tractor's bucket loader, we had the gravel laid out in less than an hour. Then came the March storm, the windstorm that sent half the neighborhood's trash cans into the next zip code. I spent that Sunday driving the tractor up and down the block, gathering limbs, righting toppled planters, even moving a broken fence post for the landings. Ella rode beside me in the passenger step, waving at everyone. That day was the first time I saw her smile in weeks. Not one person complained then. But now the HOA's letter sat in the trash can under a mess of crumpled snack wrappers and receipts. Their silence was louder than any argument. The tractor wasn't just a tool. It was how I kept moving. After a decade running into burning buildings, I'd learned the only way to deal with trauma was forward motion. Idle hands made the ghosts come back, so I kept busy. Ella deserved a dad who could stay present. I spent the week repainting the back fence, clearing brush from the rear slope, and even started helping install raised garden beds at the school after the principal caught wind of my handyman reputation. But the HOA's threat kept hanging in the back of my mind like a pressure system. Then came Saturday morning. I'd barely poured my coffee when I heard tires crunching on the gravel. A white SUV with Hillside Ridge HOA, stenciled in fine gold lettering, pulled into my driveway. Karen Delaney stepped out, same windbreaker, same clipboard. She didn't knock. She stood by the mailbox, arms crossed, waiting. I walked out slowly, taking a sip of my coffee. "Morning," I said, keeping my voice calm. She didn't smile. "Mr. Riker, the 2-week grace period has expired. The equipment is still in view. I sent a formal exemption request. Included supporting documentation and examples of community service," I said. "And it was reviewed and denied," she said flatly. "The HOA has voted unanimously." "Then I'd like to attend the next board meeting," I replied. "That's not how it works." I blinked. "Excuse me," she pulled out another letter, this one in a plastic sleeve, taped to a pre-filled envelope. "Second violation notice. The fine is now $275. If unpaid, it may result in a lien." She handed it to me like a parking ticket. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with Ella asleep upstairs, my laptop open researching the bylaws. The HOA's handbook was vague in the way most power structures are. It gave them all the discretion without clear definitions. Unsightly equipment could mean anything. There was no appeals process written in. No transparency on how fines were decided. I started a folder, scanned every document, highlighted inconsistencies, tracked every task I'd done for neighbors. It wasn't just about a tractor anymore. It was about how power moved in silence and how easily people like me got flattened under it when we didn't fight back. The next morning, I noticed something strange. My mailbox had been tagged with a bright orange sticker, small but noticeable. Pending violation review, it said. Ella pointed it out before school. Why does it feel like we're being watched? She asked. Because we were. I'd seen the way Karen drove by at odd hours, how she slowed when I was in the yard, how she stood with other board members near the park, glancing at our house like it had grown fangs. I started documenting every encounter. I wasn't paranoid. I was a firefighter. We learned to observe patterns, and this pattern was coordinated. That week, I got another letter, this time from a private towing company contracted by the HOA. They had authorization to impound unauthorized equipment if I did not comply within 72 hours. Now they were threatening to tow my tractor. Legally, they couldn't touch anything behind a locked gate or on private property without a court order, but they were betting I didn't know that. I called the sheriff's office. Sergeant Donnelly remembered me from my time with the engine company in Raleigh. We'd coordinated on wildfires once. He laughed when I told him what was going on. They want to tow your tractor, he said. Apparently, it's destroying the visual harmony of the neighborhood. You should see what's parked behind some of these HOA fences. Sounds like someone's making an example out of you. Is there anything I can do? Keep it locked. Take photos, and if they so much as set foot inside your fence line, call us immediately. It's private property. HOA doesn't override the law. I thanked him, hung up, and added legal contacts to the top of my folder. That weekend, I kept the tractor locked with an industrial chain, moved it a few feet further behind the garage, posted a security sign, 24/7 surveillance. That part was bluff, but the flashing red light I installed made it convincing. Still, the pressure didn't let up. Flyers went out. HOA newsletters included a thinly veiled reminder about certain homeowners disregarding community standards. Someone even slipped an anonymous note under my door. You're not special. Rules apply to everyone. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't have guessed, was that I'd been through worse. I'd pulled bodies from fire, carried children down ladders. I'd watched comrades fall. A few Karen Delaney's with clipboards weren't going to break me. Then came the rain. The first night, it was just steady showers. By the second, the streets were slick and shining like black rivers. By the third, we got the alerts, flood warning, stay indoors. Hillside Ridge sat on a slope with inadequate drainage, something I'd noticed on my first walk. A development error they probably papered over during planning, but now it was becoming dangerous. Ella stood beside me by the window that night, watching the water pool at the end of the street. The culvert was overflowing. Storm drains clogged with leaves. Dad, she whispered, is it going to flood? I didn't answer right away, because I already knew the answer. The following morning, I woke to the sound of distant thunder, low and steady, like a train crawling through the trees. Rain still fell in sheets, pounding the roof in rhythm, and the light through the curtains had that dull gray cast that warned of worse to come. The kind of sky you don't just see, you feel in your teeth. I dressed quickly and headed outside to check the slope behind our property. Water was already collecting at the base of the tree line, and a slow current was pushing debris against the edge of the fence. My fire break had done its job so far, but this wasn't just runoff anymore. This was building pressure. I'd just returned to the front yard when I saw the white HOA SUV creeping down the street. Its tires hissed through shallow water, and there she was, Karen Delaney, sitting behind the wheel like a patrol officer on a beat she took far too seriously. She pulled into my driveway without hesitation, windshield wipers ticking back and forth in a steady rhythm. I stayed put, arms crossed, watching as she stepped out, carefully holding a red folder over her head to shield from the rain. Her heels sank slightly into the soaked earth with each step. "Mr. Riker," she called without preamble. I raised my eyebrows. "You're out early." "This won't take long." She handed me the red folder. Inside was a printed notice, bolded and stamped at the bottom. Final enforcement action. Compliance required immediately. I flipped through the pages. This wasn't just another fine. It was a formal notice of intent to escalate. They were moving to place a lien on my property, citing refusal to comply with aesthetic and community safety guidelines. The tractor, still chained and parked behind the fence, had become their hill to die on. "You've been given ample time to comply," she said, folding her arms. "The board voted unanimously. We'll be submitting paperwork to our legal department this afternoon." "In the middle of a flood warning," I asked. "This is your priority." She stiffened. "Our bylaws don't change because of weather." I let out a laugh, short and humorless. "That machine back there is about the only thing in this neighborhood that could actually help if things go south, but you're too busy printing fines to notice." "It's unsightly," she snapped, "and potentially dangerous." "And what do you think's going to happen if someone gets trapped and emergency vehicles can't get through?" She blinked like she hadn't even considered that. I could see something flicker in her eyes. Hesitation maybe, but she buried it fast beneath layers of control. "This is your final warning." I didn't respond, just let her stand there soaked at the shoulders as thunder rolled across the sky. She left without another word, tires spinning in the growing puddles as she reversed out of the driveway. I watched until she disappeared around the bend, then glanced down at the folder in my hands. This wasn't about a tractor anymore. That evening, the HOA's newsletter hit my inbox. The subject line was sterile as always, Hillside Ridge Compliance Update. But buried in the third paragraph was a direct shot. "We remind all residents that non-compliance with regulations, especially regarding outdoor storage of industrial equipment, will result in property liens and potential legal action. Rules are in place for your safety and the good of the community." There it was in black and white, not even veiled anymore. They were coming for my home. Ella sat at the kitchen table again, sketching something with colored pencils. Her latest project was a map of our neighborhood, complete with labeled streets, parks, and a small doodle of our house with a smiley face drawn on top. I watched her for a moment, that knot of rage curling tighter in my chest. "They want to take our house, huh?" she asked without looking up. I pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "They want to scare us into backing down." She didn't answer, just shaded in the trees near the fence line. "You're not going to let them write?" "No," I said. "I'm not." That night, I wrote out a full affidavit of every HOA interaction I'd had, dates, times, witnesses, and photos. I called Sergeant Donnelly again and asked if he had a contact in the county clerk's office. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew how to organize a report. I'd written hundreds during my years on the engine fire scenes, code violations, injury assessments. I knew how to document what mattered. But as I printed out the final pages of my timeline, the power flickered. Once. Then again. Then it died. The house fell into a heavy silence. I walked outside with a flashlight. The streetlights were dark. A transformer must have blown nearby. Across the cul-de-sac, I could hear voices' nervous chatter, the occasional bark of a dog. Flashlights bobbed through the windows. The whole neighborhood was going dark. I stepped behind the house to check the back slope again. What had been a shallow pool that morning was now a moving stream. The runoff was deepening. The earth was soft. If it kept up like this, the slope could give. And worse, the only access road into our subdivision was now underwater, trapped. I returned to the garage and unlocked the tractor. She roared to life on the first try, faithful as ever. I left her idling and grabbed my work gloves. Just as I was returning inside, my phone buzzed. "Caller ID Sheriff's Office," I answered. "Riker here." "Mark, it's Donnelly. We've got a situation. Let me guess," I said. "Hillside Ridge is about to flood." There was a pause. "You're right, but it's worse. Our trucks can't get through. The access bridge is underwater. We've got residents trapped off Foxglove Lane. We need help, and I know you've got that tractor of yours." I looked at Ella, who had come to the doorway clutching her flashlight. "I'm on it," I said. 10 minutes later, I was loading sandbags into the bucket loader, donning my old turnout jacket, and setting out across the soaked gravel. My daughter watched me leave from the porch, her eyes wide but steady. And as I rolled down the street, headlights cutting through sheets of rain, I passed the HOA office, trailer lights off, door closed. But standing beneath the overhang was Karen Delaney. She saw me, and I saw her. Her eyes followed the tractor like it was something alien. Like she had never once stopped to consider that the thing she tried to erase might be the only hope left. She didn't wave. But she didn't look away either. The rain didn't let up that night. If anything, it came harder, slapping sideways against my face as I maneuvered the tractor through the flooded intersection of Foxglove Lane. Water rose to the base of my boots where they rested on the metal floorboards. The engine groaned under strain, but the old machine held steady, crawling forward like a stubborn mule that knew lives depended on it. The sheriff's office had coordinated via shortwave radios, cell towers were down, and the internet was gone with the power. I was relaying between stranded homes, ferrying bags of sand to front porches, helping neighbors climb into the bucket one by one to reach higher ground. Some were elderly. Others had pets wrapped in towels. A young mother with twins in her arms wept into my chest after I carried them to safety water, rising behind her doorstep like an unwelcome tide. It was just me, the tractor, and an orange rain poncho flapping like a flag in the wind. No news cameras, no HOA volunteers, no Karen. By the time I returned home after dawn, my hands were blistered through my gloves, and the tractor's battery light was flickering red. Ella ran down the driveway, barefoot, soaked to the knees, and hugged me with all the strength her 11-year-old frame could muster. "You're okay," she breathed, voice trembling. I held her tight. "Yeah, kiddo, we made it." She pointed back at the porch. A paper plate sat on the steps, weighed down by a river rock. On it, written in Sharpie, "Thank you for saving my parents. Megan Bluehouse." I didn't recognize the name. But I knew the house. Inside, I collapsed into the kitchen chair. My phone buzzed again, signal had returned. Dozens of missed calls and messages came flooding in. The neighborhood group chat was blowing up, screenshots of residents trapped, photos of my tractor in the flood. Someone had recorded a video of me hauling people in the loader, and then posted it online. It had gone viral, not just locally. Someone had tagged it HOA Find This Guy for owning a tractor. He just used it to save half the neighborhood. Thousands of shares. Comments flooded in. Most people were furious. This is what happens when bureaucracy gets drunk on power. Heroes wear raincoats and drive tractors. Shame on that HOA. And sure enough, the HOA responded, just not to me. Karen issued an official statement via the Hillside Ridge newsletter the next afternoon. It was masterfully written if you ignored the cowardice. There was no mention of me by name, no admission of the previous fines. Instead, it read, "We are proud to be part of a community that looks after one another in times of crisis. We thank all residents who stepped up during the flood, including those who used personal resources to assist emergency responders. No apology, no retraction, just a coward's bow behind flowery praise." But it didn't work, because the neighbors weren't buying it. The next day, I found a row of gift baskets lined along the fence by my driveway, each one labeled with a family name and a note of thanks. Cookies, fresh bread, bottled water, even gasoline in a red container from one neighbor who knew I'd burned through most of mine. And yet, amid all this gratitude, the HOA still doubled down. A new email arrived. Subject line, reminder of compliance standards, tractor equipment still visible attached. A new fine. Now $500, labeled escalated and persistent violation. I stared at it for a long time. This wasn't oversight anymore. This was a vendetta. That evening, I attended the HOA board meeting in person. Karen tried to pretend she didn't see me walk in, though her eyes flicked toward me more than once. The folding room at the community center was crowded more residents than usual, most of them fresh from cleaning out basements, some still in boots, many whispering behind their hands as I passed. When the floor opened for public comment, I stood. "My name is Mark Riker," I began steady. "You may know me as the guy who lives at 118 Magnolia Trail, or maybe just as the tractor guy. Either one works." A few chuckles. "I'd like to address the enforcement action placed against me by this board. Not just the fines, not just the letters, but the campaign of harassment surveillance and willful misrepresentation of intent that's been waged against me since I moved in." Karen opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. "I'll keep it brief. I've got photos, emails, witnesses. I've spoken to legal counsel. I've documented every interaction, every refusal to acknowledge exemption clauses, every time I offered compromise and was met with silence or escalation, all of it." Murmurs now. Someone in the back clapped quietly. And still, despite this board's best efforts to penalize me, I used that very same unsightly dangerous piece of equipment to rescue your neighbors, to carry your children and parents out of flood zones, to bring your supplies when trucks couldn't. I took a breath. I don't want compensation. I don't want attention. But I will not be bullied into silence or submission. And if the board continues this course, I will file a formal grievance with the county. I will go public, and I will win. Silence. Karen's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the tension in her temples. The president of the board, a man named Franklin Orr, finally cleared his throat. Thank you, Mr. Riker. Your comments are on record. That was all they said. But when I walked out of the meeting, more than a dozen neighbors followed me to the parking lot. They shook my hand, clapped me on the back, asked if I'd consider running for a board seat in the next election. I didn't answer then, because I was still reeling from how far they'd pushed this, and how far I might still have to go. I didn't sleep much after that board meeting. I sat at the kitchen table long after Ella had gone to bed. The silence of the house interrupted only by the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of rain-stretched wood. I had my folder open in front of me, the HOA letters spread out like crime scene photos. Every violation notice, every fine, every printout of their emails neatly labeled. I was trained to be thorough. Whether it was a structural inspection after a fire or apparently now preparing for a legal skirmish with a petty suburban regime. But this wasn't about paperwork anymore. This was personal. Their war on my tractor had stopped being about aesthetics the moment they ignored the flood, the rescues, the people I helped. They had chosen to keep pushing, and I was done waiting for common sense to prevail. The next morning, I filed an official complaint with the county's Department of Consumer Protection under the Homeowners Association Oversight Office. It wasn't just a bluff anymore. I laid everything out in a detailed affidavit evidence of selective enforcement abuse of power, the board's refusal to recognize valid exemptions, and what appeared to be retaliatory escalation following public criticism. I included photos of the flood of the rescues of Karen standing on her porch as I passed her in the tractor with a child wrapped in a blanket. Within 48 hours, I got a call from a county mediator named Rachel Sutton. "I've reviewed your packet, Mr. Riker," she said. "It's thorough and it's damning." "Good," I said, "because they're threatening to place a lien on my house." "You're protected for now," she said. "We've frozen any lien filings pending investigation. But I'm going to need a recorded statement." "I'll be ready," I told her. Then I called my old friend Daniel Vega, a retired battalion chief who'd gone on to study law after leaving the fire service. We hadn't spoken in months, but he answered after 2 rings. "Still know how to swing an axe, Riker," he laughed. "I need a different kind of backup this time," I said. "You ever take on an HOA, I've sued too," he replied. "Both for abuse of power, both settled. Then you're exactly who I need." By the end of that week, Daniel had helped me draft a cease and desist letter citing harassment and bad faith governance. He also pointed out that if the HOA had used funds to pay the towing company for enforcement without homeowner approval, that might constitute misuse of dues, something that could unravel their entire structure. Meanwhile, the neighborhood chatter had shifted. Word had gotten out about the formal complaint, and neighbors started coming forward. At first quietly. A few slipped notes in my mailbox. Others stopped me on walks. "She fined me for wind chimes," one man said, his eyes darting nervously. "They threatened to sue when we painted our door navy blue," another neighbor confided, "even though it matched the community palette." Mrs. Randall, the same elderly woman I'd helped with her bird bath, told me through tears that Karen had once threatened to revoke her gardening privileges because her sunflowers grew over 3 feet. A picture was forming, and it was ugly. This wasn't about me. It never had been. Karen Delaney and her inner circle ran the HOA like a private club with legal teeth. They enforced rules only when it suited them, targeted people they didn't like, bent bylaws when it benefited friends, ignored genuine needs in favor of punishing small infractions. What started with a tractor was revealing a much deeper rot. Ella, perceptive as ever, saw the change too. "Everyone's talking about you at school," she said one afternoon as she set her backpack down. "Some people's parents are mad. Some are saying you're like a rebel." I raised an eyebrow. "A rebel like Star Wars, but for old people." I laughed despite myself. "Thanks, kiddo." She leaned on the counter. Are you going to stop? Would you want me to? She shook her head. You didn't do anything wrong. And there it was, clear as day. No matter how complicated the legal filings became, how tangled the bylaws were, how many HOA meetings I had to sit through, the moral compass was simple. Ella knew I was standing up not just for us, but for everyone too afraid to speak. I wasn't just protecting my right to own a machine. I was protecting our right to live without fear of petty tyranny. A few nights later, someone egged our house. I heard at first soft thuds against the siding, then the telltale crack of shells. I ran outside, but the street was empty, just darkness and the smell of wet yolk. It wasn't hard to guess who sent the message. The next morning, I filed a police report, added it to the county complaint, and installed a motion-activated camera above the garage. But something had changed in me. The fear was gone. I'd seen what real danger looked like: flames licking at rafters, collapsed, beams blood on my uniform. A few cowardly eggs in the night that didn't shake me. It only proved how desperate they'd become. And then Karen made her next move. A week later, she sent out another neighborhood email blast. The subject line was unusually dramatic: emergency meeting property, standard crisis. Inside, the language was coded, but the message was unmistakable. She blamed certain residents for disrupting harmony, accused people of spreading dangerous rhetoric, and proposed new amendments to the bylaws that would grant the board broader authority to fine-tow and restrict unauthorized activity. It was a power grab, and it was public. So I responded in kind. Using my documentation, I created a simple PDF, "What You're Not Being Told About Your HOA." It listed every questionable fine, every neighbor's anonymous statement, the law citations Vega had given me, and most importantly, proof that Karen had attempted to authorize a lien during a state emergency, which was potentially illegal under county disaster response ordinances. I printed 50 copies, and Ella helped me deliver them one by one, mailbox to mailbox. By Sunday, the whispers had turned into something louder. A neighbor posted in the HOA forum, "Why is the board threatening the guy who saved my dad?" Another, "Can we vote to recall board members asking for a friend?" By Monday, Karen looked rattled. She passed me on the sidewalk and for the first time didn't speak. Just clutched her folder tighter and walked faster. The tide was turning, and I wasn't backing down. The air thickened over Hillside Ridge that week, not just with humidity, but with tension. Everyone felt it. Even the usual niceties, the morning waves, the polite nods at the mailbox, shifted into silence or sudden curiosity. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact were now looking at me a little longer, and those who once whispered behind closed doors began asking real questions out loud in daylight. And still, the rain didn't stop. The meteorologists on the local news sounded nervous. One used the phrase "unseasonably persistent atmospheric river." Another mentioned a possible dam release upstream if saturation continued. Flood warnings extended by the hour. Ella and I kept our go bags near the front door. I double-checked the generator and topped off fuel for the tractor. But Karen Delaney, she doubled down again. 2 days before the emergency HOA meeting she'd scheduled, she sent out another neighborhood-wide email. "In light of recent disruptions and the spread of misinformation, the board will propose new measures to ensure adherence to our community's founding vision. All residents are encouraged to attend. Non-attendance may result in limited voting privileges moving forward." It was a threat, thinly veiled, but sharp as glass. And yet something about it backfired. That night, I got texts from neighbors I barely knew. "You going to that thing? Heard you're the reason we've still got a functioning backslope. If you speak, I'll back you." Support was shifting from passive tolerance to vocal resistance. I was ready. But then nature moved faster than policy. On Friday night, the sky cracked wide open. I was in the garage replacing the front light on the tractor when the first gust of wind roared through the street like a warning. Power lines danced above the rooftops, and a deafening boom shook the windows as lightning struck the ridge. Within minutes, the power grid failed again, this time for good. I stepped into the front yard and saw what I feared: a wall of water, muddy and fast, crawling through the mouth of the cul-de-sac. The retention pond at the bottom of Hillside Ridge had overflowed, turning streets into tributaries. Neighbors screamed in the distance, dogs barked, lights flickered out one by one, and then came the unmistakable sound of sirens. Only they weren't moving. They were stuck, trapped like the rest of us. My phone buzzed. It was Sergeant Donnelly. "Mark, we need you again," he said, breath ragged. "The station can't get in. Dispatch is overwhelmed. Can you run evac from the western slope? We've got families stranded, including kids." I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my fire jacket, pulled on my boots, and rolled the tractor out onto the waterlogged street. The loader bucket sloshed through floodwater tires half submerged. I'd mounted a spare floodlight on the roof weeks earlier. Now it cut through the storm like a beacon. Ella stood on the porch, arms crossed, soaked in seconds. "Be careful," she said, her voice barely audible. I nodded. "I'll be back. Promise." The first stretch was brutal. The main road into Foxglove Lane was underwater. I rerouted through a side yard, knocking over a hedge in the process, and made it to the back of the cul-de-sac, where water reached the porch steps of 3 different homes. I raised the bucket, helped people climb in. Some had backpacks. One woman carried a parrot in a shoebox. And standing at the edge of the last flooded driveway, soaked to the bone, trembling not from cold but something else, was Karen Delaney. She wore that same red HOA windbreaker, now heavy with rain hood down, clipboard gone. Her house was lower on the slope than mine. I could see the water rising around her garage. She stood motionless as I approached. I braced myself for another insult, another lecture. But she said nothing, just stared at me, her arms clutching a plastic tub with soaked documents pressed to her chest. I stopped the tractor a few feet away, engine idling. "You coming or not?" I called out. She looked up, and for the first time since I moved in, I saw it. Not control, not smugness, not disdain, fear. Not of me, but of being powerless. She hesitated, then nodded. I lowered the bucket. She climbed in, and just like that, the woman who tried to have my home likened was now sitting in the same metal scoop where I'd carried toddlers' groceries and sandbags. We didn't speak. I dropped her off near the church where the sheriff's volunteers had set up a makeshift shelter. She stepped out dripping and turned back toward me. She started. "I didn't know." "That's the problem," I said, quiet. "You never asked." She didn't reply, just lowered her eyes. I reversed without another word. Over the next 4 hours, I hauled out 15 more people, 4 of them elderly, 2 in wheelchairs. A volunteer handed me protein bars and dry gloves at the shelter checkpoint. My arms felt like lead. But I kept going. Because now the whole neighborhood could see what mattered, could see what power looked like when it served instead of ruled. When I finally parked the tractor back at home, dawn was breaking dim and gray. My boots left muddy trails through the house as I peeled off wet layers. Ella had fallen asleep on the couch waiting for me. Me, a flashlight clutched in her lap like a teddy bear. I didn't wake her. I just knelt beside her, brushed the hair from her face, and whispered, "We're okay." Outside, the water receded slowly. The storm had passed, but another one was just beginning. This one made of consequence, not clouds. And this time, I wasn't the only one ready to face it. The morning after the flood, the streets of Hillside Ridge looked like something from a war zone. Mud-coated sidewalks, abandoned lawn chairs tangled in bushes, a child's bicycle wedged under a mail truck that hadn't moved in 12 hours. The white HOA SUV sat sideways across the entrance to the clubhouse lot, its back bumper peeled open like a can. The ornamental brick sign that once read "Welcome to Hillside Ridge, Eston 2002, now lay in 3 broken pieces in the retention ditch. But the silence, that's what stuck with me. No barking dogs, no hedge trimmers, no Karen. Ella and I stood in our driveway, taking it all in. The tractor, caked in mud, rested like a monument to something unspoken. It was stained with streaks of red clay and twigs caught in the undercarriage. I hadn't even shut the barn-style gate around it. I just left it there, bare, exposed, undeniable. Ella tugged at my sleeve. "Did they say anything yet?" she asked. "No," I replied. "Not yet." But that silence wouldn't last. By 9:00 a.m., I got a call not from the HOA, but from Sergeant Donnelly. His voice was tired but warm. You got a minute, always, I said. Is everyone accounted for, mostly? Still some power outages, one minor injury. You prevented that number from being a whole lot higher. I leaned against the porch railing, watching water still trickle along the gutter. I just did what needed to be done. He paused, then said something I wasn't expecting. You ever think about coming back in the county? Just started a civil response volunteer corps, he said. Non-sworn. Equipment operators. Fire-trained folks. We've got grants for gear, and they need someone who doesn't panic when the water rises. I chuckled. Are you recruiting me? You'd still be your own man. No uniforms. But you'd have clearance insurance coverage, access to equipment. You'd get to teach, train younger crews, hell, even shape policy. You've earned it. I looked at the mud-streaked tractor in the yard, and then at Ella, sitting cross-legged on the front steps, sketchbook in her lap, again quietly drawing a picture of the night before. I'll think about it, I said. That's all I ask. Also, he added, you might want to check the town bulletin later today. There's a new hearing scheduled. Your HOA just got put under review by the county mediation board. Guess who filed the petition? I smiled. Sutton. Yep. Apparently your file was persuasive. I thanked him and hung up. It wasn't until I checked the local government website that it became real. Notice, formal review hearing of Hillside Ridge HOA board. Allegations of abusive governance, emergency negligence, and misuse of authority. Public comments invited. Hearing date 2 weeks from today. Below that, my name appeared as a primary petitioner. I exhaled slowly. This was it. The wheels were turning. That afternoon, I finally opened the gate, climbed back onto the tractor, and drove slowly through the neighborhood, checking in on everyone. The man on Juniper Street who'd twisted his ankle, evacuating his wife, waved from the porch with a wrapped foot and a grin. The Grays on Sycamore were sweeping out their flooded garage. Their teenage son gave me a thumbs up. I stopped to help them push a soaked couch to the curb. Everywhere I went, people came out, said thank you, brought coffee. Even Karen's next-door neighbor, a no-nonsense man named Harold, with a trimmed white beard, walked over and said, I used to think you were just stubborn. Now I think you're stubborn and right. I smiled. I'll take it. But it wasn't all praise. Late in the day, as I drove past the HOA clubhouse, which had been locked since the storm, I saw Karen sitting inside her car, parked under a tree, staring at a manila folder in her lap. Her hair was damp. Her blazer wrinkled. For once, the clipboard was nowhere in sight. She didn't see me. Or maybe she did and pretended not to. Either way, she was alone. And that told me more than any letter ever could. That evening, I held a small meeting in my garage. Nothing formal, just a gathering. 8 chairs, a cooler of lemonade, printouts of bylaws, and highlighted pages. Mrs. Randall came. So did the Hendersons. 2 younger couples from the opposite side of the loop. Even Harold showed up with a folding chair and a clipboard his own. We talked about what had gone wrong, about how the HOA had gone from serving the community to policing it, and about what could come next. I'm not here to lead a coup, I said. I'm not trying to become some kind of hero. I just want to live in a neighborhood that respects its people, not punishes them. Harold nodded. Maybe you should run for president. I laughed. I'm not a politician. You're better than one, he said. You're honest. It stayed quiet after that. But I saw it in their faces, something shifting. Not just anger anymore, but hope. By the end of the night, we had a plan and a petition. And for the first time since I'd moved into Hillside Ridge, I didn't feel like a visitor anymore. I felt home. The next morning, I found something unexpected at my front door. An envelope. Handwritten. No return address. Inside was a folded letter. Mr. Riker, I owe you more than an apology, though I doubt anything I write will matter. I was wrong. About your tractor. About you. I lost sight of what this place was supposed to be. I let control matter more than care. You didn't humiliate me, you reminded me. I've submitted my resignation to the board. You won't hear from me again. Karen Delaney. I stared at the page for a long time, then folded it quietly and tucked it into the back of my folder, labeled Evidence. Not for revenge, just to remember. Even storms can break people open. The resignation letter didn't make me celebrate. It made me pause. Karen Delaney stepping down wasn't justice. It was only the first crack in a much larger wall. The board was still intact. The system that allowed someone like her to turn neighborhood governance into personal tyranny remained. I didn't want to replace her. I wanted to dismantle the conditions that created her in the first place. But I also didn't want to become obsessed. So, for a few days, I let myself rest. Ella and I spent that Saturday morning cleaning the tractor. The mud had hardened like a shell across its undercarriage and wheels. She brought out 2 buckets and a worn sponge and insisted on doing the hood. I watched her small hands work between the dents and bolts, gentle but persistent, like she was healing it. "Are you going to be on the news?" she asked casually. I shook my head. "No plans. Some kids at school said you're famous. Famous for a tractor," I smiled. "It's not quite movie star level." She paused. "I think it's cooler." We didn't talk much after that. We just worked, side by side. The way only parents and children do when trust is rebuilt in silence. By Monday, the county's formal investigation into Hillside Ridge HOA was in full motion. Rachel Sutton called to confirm my upcoming testimony. The hearing would be public, and word had spread fast. I saw neighbors photocopying pages from my packet, reading aloud at backyard fences. Some were shocked by what they were learning: how funds had been moved without votes, how enforcement had been inconsistent, and how Karen had used HOA resources to justify personal vendettas. Then something remarkable happened. People began bringing their own stories. One resident, James Pollard, a father of 3, admitted he'd been fined $600 for building a sandbox in his backyard without prior approval. He'd paid it quietly, thinking he had no choice. Another neighbor, a woman named Teresa, revealed that she'd received a cease and desist for painting her mailbox blue, even though it matched the historical shade approved years prior. And then came the kicker. Mrs. Randall, the elderly neighbor I'd helped months earlier, stood up at a community meet and greet and read aloud her letter from the HOA, warning her that continued flowerbed expansion could result in lawn service suspension. It got a laugh, but it also made people angry. What began as quiet support turned into something stronger: cohesion. These weren't isolated cases. They were a pattern. HOA elections were only 6 weeks away, and the community was finally wide awake. But none of that prepared me for what happened next. On the Thursday, before the county hearing, the sheriff called again. "You near the ridge this afternoon?" Donnelly asked. "Yeah," I said, wary. "Why, we're escorting a FEMA truck into the neighborhood, bringing supplies. Problem is, they can't access the upper road. Still blocked from last week's storm debris." "I know that spot," I said. "It washed out under the bend. Can you meet us there with the tractor one last ride?" I didn't hesitate. 30 minutes later, I was back in the saddle, engine humming, loader bucket raised. Ella watched me leave from the sidewalk again this time, holding a homemade sign that read, "Go Tractor Dad." When I pulled up to the roadblock, the FEMA truck was already waiting. It was taller than any vehicle we'd seen in the neighborhood, white with a U.S. seal painted on the doors. 2 officers stood in waterproof gear, gesturing toward the fallen branches and loose gravel that made the turn impassable. "Thought you'd be younger," one of them joked. When I rolled up, "I get that a lot," I said. "Let's move this thing." We worked for an hour, lifted debris, pushed out tangled tree limbs, graded the slope with the tractor bucket. A small crowd gathered to watch, neighbors who'd never spoken now chatting like old friends. Children clapped when the path finally opened. The FEMA truck rumbled through the cleared turn and honked twice in thanks. But before I could drive away, I saw a figure waiting near the ridge's edge. It was Harold, white beard, work gloves, and in his hands, a folded American flag. "Don't freak out," he said. "We thought you should have this." He handed me the flag, then nodded toward the open space at the cul-de-sac entrance. "We're raising a new flag tomorrow," he said. "At the community lot. Whole neighborhood's coming. You should be there." I was quiet for a moment. Then I said, "Only if we're doing it together." He smiled. That night, as the sun dipped behind the horizon and the smell of damp pine filled the air, Ella and I stood in the backyard. She pointed up at the sky. "There's the Big Dipper," she whispered. "Yeah," I said. "I see it." She leaned against me, small and strong. "Do you think it's over?" she asked. "Not yet," I said, "but soon." And I believed it, because something had changed, not just in the bylaws or the ballots, but in the people. Hillside Ridge had woken up. The tractor, the flood, the viral video. None of it was about me, not really. It was about what we allow and what we refuse. And finally, we were refusing. Together. The morning of the flag ceremony dawned bright and strangely quiet, as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath. The clouds had finally parted, revealing crisp blue sky that stretched over Hillside Ridge like a clean slate. The mud had dried in cracks along the sidewalks, and sandbags still lined some porches like scars from a battle just won. But the spirit in the air, it was different, lighter, awake. I stood beside the new flagpole in the Central Park where the old HOA welcome sign had once stood. They'd cleared the broken bricks and replaced them with a patch of flowers. No one had asked permission. No one had waited for board approval. They just did it. By 9 a.m., nearly the entire neighborhood had gathered. Some came with strollers, others with thermoses of coffee. Even the skeptical ones, the folks who had always nodded politely but never said much, stood together near the back, arms crossed but present. And that was enough. Harold brought the flag folded tight in his arms. When he handed it to me, there was a brief moment where our eyes met and I realized he was giving me more than fabric. He was handing me trust. I raised the flag slowly. The rope creaked. The metal eyelets clinked against the pole. When the cloth reached the top and caught the morning breeze, it snapped open red, white, and blue, glowing in the sun. People clapped. Then someone started a slow chant. No more silence. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't loud. But others picked it up. No more silence. No more silence. It rippled through the crowd, soft but powerful. I turned to see Ella standing between two women holding muffins wrapped in napkins. She gave me a thumbs up with both hands and mouthed, "You did it." But we weren't done yet. The county review hearing took place in the municipal center downtown. The room was stark high ceilings, fluorescent lights, folding chairs arranged in neat rows. A long wooden table stood at the front where the HOA board members sat stiffly, hands folded. Karen was absent, her resignation filed and accepted. But the rest were there, Franklin Orr, the HOA president, with the nervous tick in his jaw. June Salazar, who never looked anyone in the eye. And a third member I hadn't met before, silent and pale. Behind them sat a legal representative in a blazer too expensive for a volunteer position. That told me everything. But this time, they weren't in control. Rachel Sutton presided calm and deliberate. To her left sat two county commissioners and a housing compliance officer. Before anything began, she addressed the room. "We are here to review allegations of misconduct, overreach, and potential violations of state HOA guidelines, as filed by residents of Hillside Ridge," she said. "Each party will be heard. Evidence has been submitted and reviewed." I was the first to speak. I didn't read a script. I didn't bring a speech. I spoke from the same place I'd spoken to my daughter from when we first arrived here, truth wrapped in quiet strength. I moved to Hillside Ridge to give my daughter peace, I began. I wasn't looking to lead anything. I wasn't interested in fights. I only wanted to keep to myself and help where I could. I glanced at the board. Franklin avoided my gaze. But what I found was an HOA that abused authority, enforced rules unevenly, and turned helpfulness into a crime. I was fined for owning a tractor that I used to maintain safety fire breaks and help neighbors clear storm damage. I was threatened with property liens. I was harassed. And when the flood came, the very equipment they tried to punish me for owning saved lives. I paused. They fined me for being prepared, and they did nothing when people needed help. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. I continued. "This isn't just about me. I'm here for Mrs. Randall fined for growing flowers, for the Pollards punished for building a sandbox, for every neighbor who paid a fee because they didn't know they could fight back." I ended simply. "I'm not asking for revenge. I'm asking for change." One by one, neighbors stood. Mrs. Randall stepped forward, her voice shaking but clear. I felt like I was being watched in my own garden. James Pollard testified, holding up receipts. "I paid the HOA more for a sandbox violation than I paid for the sandbox." Teresa brought photos of mailboxes side by side showing that hers was penalized while others weren't. The final blow came when Harold took the stand. "We're not against rules," he said. "We're against rulers. This board has forgotten the difference." The crowd applauded. The board tried to defend themselves. Franklin stammered through half-hearted explanations about community cohesion and enforcement standards, but every time he spoke, someone else rose with contradiction. Rachel Sutton took notes the entire time. At the end, she leaned into the mic. "This board," she said, "is in violation of multiple state guidelines. We are recommending immediate suspension of enforcement authority pending re-election. All fines issued over the last 6 months will be reviewed, and residents will be informed of their right to audit HOA financial records." She looked directly at Franklin. "You are no longer above the community. You are answerable to it." That evening, back at Hillside Ridge, we held an impromptu block party. Someone brought speakers. Someone else grilled hot dogs. Kids rode scooters down the dry pavement. For the first time since I moved in, the street felt alive, not curated, not controlled, but real. Harold clinked glasses with me over lemonade and whispered, "Guess what? What I'm running for president." I grinned. "Now that I'd vote for." He pointed at me. "Only if you serve as my vice." I raised an eyebrow. "Does it come with a pay raise?" He laughed. "Just the satisfaction of knowing you live where you belong." Ella came running up, covered in chalk dust and laughter. "Dad, come look! We drew you in the street." She grabbed my hand and pulled me forward. Across the pavement, in thick colored chalk, was a giant drawing of me in a red jacket driving the tractor. A speech bubble above my head read, "Helping is never against the rules." And in the corner, "To the man who reminded us how to stand." I didn't cry, but I let the moment sink in deep, like roots, like home. Weeks passed. The mud dried. The flowers bloomed again. The buzz of lawnmowers returned to Hillside Ridge. But something about the hum of the neighborhood had changed. It wasn't the same scripted politeness that first greeted me when I moved in. It was warmer now. Looser. Real. And my tractor, she stayed right where she belonged, beside the garage, freshly painted with a coat of olive green, her yellow seat gleaming in the sun. No one complained. No more letters arrived. In fact, at the next HOA newsletter, which now featured community submissions, a photo of the tractor was printed on the front page with the caption, "Sometimes heroes don't wear capes, they haul gravel." Ella taped it on the fridge like a trophy. The next board election came and went with little resistance. Harold won the presidency with 87% of the vote. Teresa took the treasurer role. 2 new board members were added, both young parents, eager and compassionate. I turned down the vice presidency, but agreed to sit on the Community Safety Committee. The first thing I pushed through a bylaw revision that clearly defined service equipment use and protection clauses during emergencies. We called it Riker's Clause. At the end of the first meeting, someone clapped when it passed. Then the whole room joined in. It caught me off guard. I wasn't used to applause. I'd spent so long quietly pushing, building, rescuing. Not for show. Just for the simple fact that I could. That I should. That night, Ella and I walked the loop around the neighborhood. Her fingers curled around mine, and she skipped a little when we passed the new garden at the park. The flowers Mrs. Randall had once been warned about were now centerpiece displays with handmade signs from neighborhood kids labeling each one. Sunburst daisies, purple flame, zinnia, Miss Randall's magic beans. A week later, something else arrived. A brown envelope from the County Civil Response Corps, inside a formal offer. Part-time emergency operations liaison. Flexible hours. Special instructor designation for disaster prep. I would teach, advise, respond when needed. They offered a modest stipend, but more importantly, autonomy. I accepted. It wasn't a return to firefighting. It was a return to purpose. That same afternoon, I walked back into the garage, put on my old station jacket, and climbed onto the tractor once more. Not for duty, not for defiance, just to breathe and feel the weight of it all settle into something quieter. Ella peeked in. "You going somewhere?" she asked. "Just around the block," I said. "Want to come?" She smiled, grabbed her helmet, and climbed up beside me. We rolled slow. Neighbors waved. Children raced on bikes beside us. One little boy saluted. I saluted back. As we rounded the bend, we passed Karen's old house. It had sold a few days earlier. The new owners had already replaced the mailbox, repainted the siding, and removed the security camera she'd mounted above the garage. But what caught my eye was the young woman in the yard watering plants with a toddler bouncing at her feet. She looked up. I waved. She waved back without hesitation. That too felt like healing. Later that week, I got a knock at the door. It was Mrs. Randall holding a small ceramic pot with something green and sprouting from the soil. "It's a tomato plant," she said, beaming. "From the batch you saved during the flood," I figured. "It belongs in your garden now." I blinked. "You remembered." I never forgot. She turned to leave, then paused. "You know, my late husband was a fireman, back in Illinois. He always said the best ones didn't ask for thanks." I didn't answer right away, just held the pot gently. "Thank you," I finally said. "No," she replied, "thank you." As the seasons changed, I watched Hillside Ridge settle into a better rhythm. The fences stayed white, but they no longer served as walls. The rules still existed, but now they were grounded in sense, not fear. People looked out for each other, helped each other. We weren't perfect, but we were better. One evening after dinner, Ella pulled out an old binder she found tucked behind the bookshelf. It was the HOA welcome packet. Inside were the old printed rules highlighted, marked up, annotated with frustration. "What are you going to do with this?" she asked. I took it from her, turned a few pages, then walked it out to the fire pit in the backyard. She followed me silently as I dropped it in and struck a match. The paper curled and blackened, the ink vanishing in smoke. I didn't say anything. Neither did she. But when it was done, she whispered, "That was awesome." I chuckled. "Let's not tell the board, okay?" She zipped her lips. In the final weeks of fall, the county invited me to speak at a preparedness summit. Nothing flashy, just a panel of rural safety advocates, former responders, and volunteers. But they asked me to open. I stood at a modest podium in a county conference room, the lights soft, the air cool. I was fined for owning a tractor, I began. But I kept it, because I believed in being ready, and I believed in helping people even when no one asked me to. I scanned the crowd, and when the flood came, the people I helped weren't strangers. They were neighbors. Some who had never spoken to me. Some who once tried to shut me down. But in that moment, none of that mattered. We were just people. Trying to get each other home. I paused. We talk a lot about preparedness in terms of kits and checklists. But the real work, it's in the quiet things. The shovel leaning against your fence. The stranger you wave to every morning. The choice to step in even when you're not obligated. Applause rose slowly. Later, a young man approached me. "I live in a neighborhood just like yours," he said. "They told me to get rid of my tools. Said they ruined the look. But after hearing your story, I'm keeping them." I shook his hand and realized this wasn't just about Hillside Ridge anymore. It was bigger. On the anniversary of the flood, Ella and I sat on the tailgate of the truck, watching the sunset paint the sky above the ridge in soft gold. "Do you think things will stay good?" she asked. I wrapped an arm around her. "I think they will. Because now people know how to speak up. They know they're not alone." She nodded. We sat in silence, letting the dusk settle around us. Then she said softly, "I'm glad we came here." "Me too," I replied. Because in the end, the battle wasn't just about a tractor. It was about what you stand for when no one's watching, and who you become when the storm clears.